Zala squinted at the cracked viewport of her battered spaceship, her knuckles white against the control panel. Stars burned coldly outside, their indifferent light mirroring her desolation. Somewhere out there, a better life awaited. She just had to reach it. "Mommy, are we almost there?" came a small, hesitant voice. Lena, her golden-haired daughter, tugged at Zala's sleeve. Her wide, glowing eyes shimmered with exhaustion, but retained a spark of hope. Zala forced a smile. "Almost, my little star," she whispered, stroking Lena's hair. "Earth is just ahead." The journey had been unforgiving. Her once flawless life on Earth, a society obsessed with honor and unity, was a distant memory. Her husband Kel, once her rock and beacon, had left her for greed and power. His abandonment branded Zala a failure, her daughter a pariah. Earth's judgment had driven her to the stars, searching for a fresh start. The console beeped, jerking Zala from her thoughts. Earth's blue and green surface loomed, beautiful yet terrifying. The ship groaned as it began its descent, a symphony of warning lights and mechanical protest. Lena clung to her arm. "It's okay, baby," Zala murmured, though her pulse thundered. The ship screamed as it pierced Earth's atmosphere. Sparks flew, smoke billowed. Zala gritted her teeth, wrestling with the controls. Just when it seemed the ship would break apart, it crash-landed with a deafening roar. Silence followed. "Mommy!" Lena's voice trembled. Zala unbuckled and rushed to her daughter, scanning her for injuries. "You're okay," she breathed, pulling Lena into a fierce hug. Relief was short-lived as rain pelted through the shattered hull. Zala carried Lena out, her boots squelching in the wet earth. The planet was raw, untamed, nothing like Earth's pristine cities. Towering trees swayed in the storm, their branches clawing at the sky. Zala scavenged debris from her ship, hastily constructing a crude shelter under a massive oak tree. As the storm raged, Zala held Lena close, the child's warmth her anchor. Dawn broke, golden light creeping through the trees. Exhaustion clouded Zala's mind, but she kept vigilant, jagged metal in hand. A rustling noise snapped her to attention. From the mist emerged a tall figure, a man, broad-shouldered, with straw-colored hair beneath a hat. A human. "Hey there," the man called, his voice calm but wary. He raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. "Didn't mean to scare you." Zala brandished her makeshift weapon. "Stay back," she barked, her alien accent sharp against the human tongue she had studied. The man halted, nodding. "Fair enough," he said. His gaze shifted to Lena, who peeked from under her blanket, her glowing eyes wide. His expression softened. "You look like you've had a rough night. My farmhouse isn't far. Warm, dry food. No strings." Zala hesitated. His offer seemed genuine, but trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Lena's trembling swayed her decision. "Fine," she said stiffly. "But if you try anything—" "You have my word," he interrupted, his voice steady. The farmhouse was modest but inviting. Warm lights spilled from the windows, and the scent of baked bread lingered in the air. Zala scanned every corner before stepping inside. The fire's warmth was a balm against her soaked skin. "You can dry off," the man said, tossing her a towel and retreating to the kitchen. Zala remained guarded, drying Lena first. The child's awe-filled whisper, "Mommy, it's warm here," tightened Zala's chest. The man, who introduced himself as Remy, moved with a calm efficiency. He prepared soup without prying. Lena, ever curious, asked, "What soup?" Remy smiled. "Warm food. You like it?" "She doesn't eat your food," Zala snapped. "Fair enough," Remy said easily, continuing his work. His patience was unnerving, yet oddly comforting. When he handed Zala a bowl, her hands shook, not from fear but from the alien sensation of kindness without expectation. "You don't have to explain," Remy said, settling across from her. "Stay as long as you need." Zala stared at him, unblinking. Offers of help always came with a price. Yet Remy's steady gaze held no agenda, only quiet empathy. For the first time in years, Zala felt something close to safety. Not trust, but a flicker of it. That night, As Lena slept wrapped in blankets, Zala observed Remy stoking the fire. His movements carried a weight she recognized: loss, loneliness, and resilience. He had his own scars, carved deep but invisible. Outside, the storm had passed. Inside, beneath the warm glow of the fire, Zala allowed herself a moment to hope. Perhaps, against all odds, this strange human could be the start of a new life. For her and for Lena. Remy stirred awake to the sound of muffled footsteps. The morning light filtered through the farmhouse windows, casting long, golden rays across the wooden floor. He blinked groggily, the events of the previous night coming back in flashes. The storm, the crash, the strange purple-skinned woman, and her wide-eyed daughter. His gaze drifted to the corner where Zala and Lena had huddled by the fireplace. The blankets were neatly folded, and the space was empty. Frowning, he swung his legs over the side of the bed and padded toward the kitchen. His boots creaked against the floorboards. The sound of running water reached his ears, and he paused at the doorway. There at the sink stood Zala. She was rinsing out the soup pot from the night before, her alien features illuminated in the soft morning light. For a moment, Remy said nothing, struck by the quiet normalcy of the scene. She looked human, despite the purple hue of her skin and the faint shimmer that danced across it when she moved. Her long hair, damp from the rain, fell in a cascade of violet waves down her back. "You don't have to do that," Remy said, leaning against the doorframe. Zala stiffened, her shoulders tense. She didn't turn around, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "You let us stay. This is the least I can do." "Fair enough," Remy replied, crossing the room to retrieve a cup of coffee. He poured 2 mugs and placed one on the counter near her. "Figured you want something warm." Zala glanced at the mug, then at him, her glowing eyes narrowing in suspicion. After a moment, she reached for it, taking a tentative sip. Her brow furrowed as she swallowed, clearly unaccustomed to the bitter taste. Remy chuckled. "Not a fan of coffee?" he asked. "It's strange," she admitted, her voice softer now. She set the mug down and turned to face him fully. "Your hospitality, it's unusual." Remy raised an eyebrow. "Unusual how?" "On Earth, help always comes with conditions. Debt. Obligation. No one gives freely." "Well, this isn't Earth," Remy said simply, taking a long sip of his own coffee. "Here folks help each other out. No strings." Zala studied him, her sharp gaze searching for deception. When she found none, her posture relaxed, just slightly. "Where's Lena?" Remy asked, glancing toward the living room. "Asleep," Zala said. "She's tired." "Can't blame her," Remy said. "Kid's been through a lot, hasn't she?" Zala's jaw tightened, and she looked away. "More than she should have," Remy nodded, sensing her reluctance to elaborate. Instead, he gestured toward the back door. "Come on, let me show you something." Zala hesitated, her instincts screaming to stay on guard. But curiosity won out, and she followed him outside. The morning air was crisp, and the scent of damp earth lingered after the storm. Remy led her to the edge of the field, where a patch of tilled soil stretched out toward the horizon. "This is my farm," he said, gesturing to the land. "Been in the family for generations. Doesn't look like much, but it gets the job done." Zala frowned, scanning the rows of crops and the barn in the distance. "You work this land alone?" "Yeah," Remy admitted, a hint of weariness creeping into his voice. "Been managing it on my own since my dad passed a few years back." Zala glanced at him, noting the shadows beneath his eyes. For all his calm demeanor, there was a heaviness about him, a burden she recognized too well. "It's peaceful here," she said after a moment. Remy chuckled. "Most days. Storms like last night can mess things up pretty good, though." Speaking of which, he turned to her, his expression serious. "What happened? Why'd you crash here?" Zala stiffened, the question she'd been dreading finally surfacing. She crossed her arms, her gaze shifting to the horizon. "It's complicated. Try me," Remy said, his tone gentle but firm. Zala hesitated, her instincts warring with her need to trust someone. Anyone. "Finally," she sighed. "My planet Earth was my home. But after my husband abandoned us, we were outcasts. I couldn't stay there, not with how they treated Lena. I heard about Earth, about your people's compassion. I thought maybe. She trailed off, her voice thick with emotion. Remy nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. And your husband? Where's he now? Gone, Zala said bitterly, chasing wealth and power across the stars. He left us with nothing. Remy frowned but said nothing, sensing the pain behind her words. Instead, he glanced toward the farmhouse. Well, you're here now. Safe. That's what matters. Zala turned to him, surprise flickering across her face. Just like that? You're willing to take in an alien, a stranger, without question? Remy shrugged. Like I said, this isn't Earth out here. We look out for each other. For the first time, Zala allowed herself a small, tentative smile. It was fleeting, but it was there. As the day unfolded, Zala worked alongside Remy, helping to repair the storm damage. Lena eventually joined them, her wide-eyed wonder bringing a rare lightness to the labor. Remy showed her how to feed the chickens, earning a giggle when one pecked at her tiny hand. By evening, the three of them sat around the table, sharing a simple meal. Zala watched as Lena laughed at one of Remy's stories, her guarded heart softening with every passing moment. For years, she had believed the universe to be a cold, unyielding place. But here, in this strange, simple farmhouse, she began to wonder if there was still room for hope. And perhaps, just perhaps, for something more. The days at the farm settled into a rhythm, one that was both new and strangely comforting for Zala. The mornings were quiet, filled with the scent of fresh earth and the distant clucking of chickens. Remy would rise first, his heavy boots marking his path to the fields, and Zala would follow soon after, always keeping Lena close. Lena, for her part, was thriving in a new environment. Her luminous eyes sparkled with curiosity as she explored the farmhouse and the land beyond it. Remy had taken a liking to teaching her the basics of farm life, how to gather eggs, how to avoid the grouchy rooster, and even how to plant seeds. One morning, Zala watched from the porch as Lena ran across the yard, her laughter ringing out as Remy jogged behind her, carrying a small bucket of feed. The sight tugged at something deep inside Zala, a longing she hadn't realized she'd buried. By the second week, the tension between Zala and Remy had begun to ease. While she still kept her guard up, her sharp edges had softened. She found herself trusting him more, little by little. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Remy stood by the barn, hammering a loose board into place. Zala approached, her steps quiet but deliberate. You don't have to keep fixing everything for us, she said, her tone more teasing than accusatory. Remy paused mid-swing and turned, raising an eyebrow. You mean like this barn door that your kid decided to swing on like a jungle gym? Zala smirked. She's curious. Blame yourself for teaching her to explore. He chuckled, shaking his head. Fair enough. Still, it's good to keep busy. Zala tilted her head, studying him. You don't strike me as the type to need distractions. Remy set the hammer down, leaning against the barn wall. Distractions help, he admitted, his voice quieter now. Keeps the mind from wandering. To what? Zala asked, her curiosity piqued. He hesitated, then shrugged. Things I've lost. People I couldn't save. Zala's gaze softened. You've lost family. Remy nodded. Yeah, my folks mostly. Dad was sick for a while. Mom tried to hold everything together, but when she passed, it all kind of fell apart. Guess that's why I stuck around here. The farm's all I've got left of them. Zala was quiet for a moment, the weight of his words settling between them. You've built something good here, she said finally. Something worth protecting. Remy glanced at her, surprised by the compliment. Thanks. What about you? Orth, was it always like you described? Zala's expression darkened, the memories of her home planet flooding back. Orth was beautiful, advanced, but it was also rigid. Tradition ruled everything. When I lost my husband, they didn't just see me as a widow. They saw me as a failure, a stain on their perfect system. Her voice faltered. Lena deserved better than that. Remy nodded, understanding in his eyes. And now, Zala's gaze drifted to the farmhouse, where Lena sat on the porch steps, humming a song to herself as she played with a small pile of rocks. Now, I just want her to be happy. Safe. She seems happy here, Remy said, a small smile tugging at his lips. She's got a knack for chasing those chickens, I'll give her that. Zala chuckled softly. She likes you, you know. I think she sees you as some kind of hero. Remy scratched the back of his neck, a hint of embarrassment coloring his face. I'm just a guy trying to keep my farm in one piece. Zala shook her head. You're more than that. You helped us when no one else would. That's rare. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. The barrier Zala had built around her heart wavered, and Remy's usual guarded demeanor softened. But before either could say anything, a loud crash echoed from the direction of the farmhouse. They bolted toward the sound, Zala's heart pounding in her chest. On the porch, Lena stood frozen, her eyes wide as she stared at the overturned basket of tools near the steps. A shadow loomed just beyond the fence line, moving quickly toward the barn. Stay here, Zala barked, her protective instincts flaring to life as she shoved Lena behind her. Remy grabbed a pitchfork from the side of the house, his face grim. What is it? I don't know, Zala said, her voice tense. But it's not human. The two of them approached the barn cautiously, the sound of shuffling growing louder. Zala's fingers tightened around the jagged piece of metal she still carried, a makeshift weapon from her crashed ship. The figure stepped into the dim light of the barn's entrance, and Zala's stomach dropped. It was a creature she recognized, a bounty hunter from Orth. Its hulking frame was covered in chitinous armor, its eyes glowing an eerie blue. Zala vreth, it growled, its voice like grinding stones. You've been marked for return. The hunter collapsed with a gurgled snarl, its body twitching before falling still. Breathing heavily, Zala stumbled back, her hands trembling. Remy rose to his feet, clutching his side, but otherwise unhurt. You okay? He asked, his voice laced with concern. Zala nodded, though her eyes were distant. They found me, she whispered. More will come. Remy placed a steady hand on her shoulder. Then we'll be ready. The weight of his words, and the quiet conviction behind them, anchored her. For the first time, Zala felt like she wasn't facing the universe alone. The aftermath of the battle left a tense quiet hanging over the farm. Zala worked quickly to dispose of the bounty hunter's body, dragging it out to the woods under the cover of night. Remy helped in silence, his jaw tight with unspoken questions. Lena had fallen asleep in the farmhouse, curled up on the couch, blissfully unaware of the danger that had nearly claimed their fragile peace. Once the body was buried, Zala straightened and wiped her hands on her pants. Remy leaned against a tree, the dim moonlight casting shadows across his face. Now's the time to tell me everything, he said, his voice calm but firm. Zala sighed, the weight of her secrets pressing down on her. What do you want to know? All of it, he replied. Who they are, why they're after you, and what I just signed up for by letting you stay here. Back in the farmhouse, Zala sat by the fire, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea Remy had made. She hesitated, staring into the flames as if the answers lay hidden in their flickering dance. Remy sat across from her, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. I told you about Orth, Zala began, her voice quiet. What I didn't tell you is that my husband's business ventures left me more than a widow. He made enemies, powerful ones. Remy raised an eyebrow. And they think you owe them something? She nodded. He got tangled up with the Syndicate. They control trade across half the galaxy, resources, weapons, even people. Kel borrowed from them to fund his explorations. When he vanished, they came after me, demanding repayment. Remy frowned. What kind of repayment? Everything, Zala said bitterly. My ship, my daughter, my freedom. To them, I'm collateral. A loose thread that needs tying up. Remy leaned forward, his voice low. And this bounty hunter was one of theirs? Yes, Zala said, her gaze dropping. But he's just the first. The Syndicate doesn't give up, and when they realize he's failed, she trailed off, her hands tightening around the mug. Remy exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. So, what's the plan? Zala looked at him, surprised. You're not telling us to leave? He shook his head. They'll find you wherever you go. Running won't stop them. His eyes met hers, steady and determined. We fight back. The following days were spent preparing. Remy dug into his father's old storage shed, pulling out tools and equipment Zala didn't recognize but quickly saw the potential in. Together, they fortified the farmhouse, reinforcing the doors and windows, setting up tripwire alarms around the property, and even rigging up a few improvised traps near the fence line. Remy took to teaching Zala how to use his hunting rifle, though she proved more adept with the weapon than he expected. Her movements were precise, her aim unerring. "You're a quick learner," he remarked, watching as she reloaded the rifle with practiced ease. "I've had to be," Zala replied, handing the weapon back to him. "Survival doesn't wait for you to catch up." Meanwhile, Lena adapted to the changes in her own way. Though Zala shielded her from the full extent of the danger, the little girl was perceptive. She stuck close to her mother, her wide eyes watching everything. Remy took it upon himself to distract her whenever possible, teaching her more about farm life. One afternoon, as Remy showed Lena how to plant seeds in the garden, Zala watched from the porch, her heart aching with a mix of gratitude and worry. She knew this peace was temporary, a fragile bubble that could burst at any moment. It wasn't long before the next threat arrived. Late one night, Zala was jolted awake by the distant wail of a tripwire alarm. She leaped from the couch where she'd been dozing, her heart pounding. Remy was already at the window, peering into the darkness. "Movement near the south fence," he whispered, reaching for the rifle. Zala grabbed her makeshift weapon, her senses on high alert. "How many?" "Can't tell," Remy said. "But it's more than one." They moved quickly and silently, slipping out the back door to avoid detection. The air was cold and still, the only sound the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Zala's sharp eyes scanned the darkness, her muscles coiled like a spring. Then she saw them, 3 figures moving along the fence line. They were humanoid but clearly alien, their silhouettes distorted by bulky armor and glowing visors. One of them carried a scanner, its eerie green light sweeping across the ground. "Scouts," Zala muttered. "They're looking for tracks?" Remy frowned. "They're not getting past the traps." As if on cue, one of the scouts tripped a wire, triggering a flashbang device Remy had rigged. The explosion of light and sound disoriented the group, sending them scrambling for cover. Zala didn't hesitate. She darted forward, using the chaos to her advantage. Her first strike was clean, the jagged metal slicing through the exposed joint of one scout's armor. The figure collapsed with a guttural cry. The other 2 recovered quickly, raising weapons that crackled with energy. Remy fired from behind, a shot taking one of them in the shoulder. "Keep moving," Zala shouted, ducking behind a tree as a bolt of energy seared past her. The remaining scout charged at her, swinging a bladed weapon with deadly precision. Zala parried the blow, her arms straining against the creature's brute strength. She twisted, using its momentum to send it crashing into a nearby tree. Remy's rifle cracked again, the shot dropping the final scout. When the fight was over, Zala and Remy stood over the fallen intruders, their breaths heavy in the cold night air. "Think they had time to call for backup?" Remy asked, wiping sweat from his brow. Zala knelt, searching one of the bodies. She found a communicator and crushed it under her boot. "Not anymore." Remy gave a wry smile. "Remind me not to get on your bad side." She managed a small laugh, though her expression remained serious. "This was just the beginning. They'll send more?" "Let them," Remy said firmly. "We'll be ready." For the first time in years, Zala felt something stir within her, a fragile hope, tempered by resolve. She wasn't alone in this fight, and together they might just stand a chance. The morning after the fight, the air on the farm was unusually still. It carried a sharp, earthy smell of dew and churned soil. The remnants of the previous night's battle were strewn across the fields, scorch marks on the ground, shattered equipment, and the bodies of the Syndicate scouts buried in hastily dug graves. Inside the farmhouse, Zala sat by the fire with Lena asleep in her lap, her tiny hand clutching her mother's jacket. Remy worked at the kitchen table, meticulously cleaning his rifle and laying out an assortment of supplies. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but it was heavy with unspoken thoughts. "You know they'll keep coming," Zala said finally, her voice soft but steady. Remy didn't look up. "I figured as much." She studied him, the firelight casting shadows across his rugged face. "You don't have to be part of this. You've already done more than I ever could have asked for. If we leave now—" "No," Remy interrupted, his tone firm. He set the rifle down and looked at her. "You're staying. Both of you." Zala opened her mouth to argue, but he cut her off with a small, weary smile. "I don't know much about syndicates or alien politics, but I know this. Running won't solve anything. And I've run enough in my life." "What are you running from?" Zala asked, her curiosity finally overcoming her caution. Remy hesitated, his jaw tightening. "My wife," he said quietly. "She passed a few years ago. Cancer. I thought if I buried myself out here, I'd stop feeling so hollow." Zala looked at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. She knew what it was to run from loss, to build walls against the world. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice gentle. Remy shrugged, though his eyes betrayed the depth of his pain. "You and Lena, you've brought something back to this place. It's not just me anymore." Zala blinked, the weight of his words sinking in. She looked down at Lena, her daughter's peaceful face a reminder of why she had fought so hard to survive. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt something shift, a crack in the armor she had worn for so long. By midday, the two of them had begun clearing the damage from the property. The traps were reset, the defenses reinforced, and the farmhouse's systems checked and double-checked. Remy showed Zala how to fortify the barn, using old lumber to create a hidden safe room for Lena. "If things get bad," Remy said, hammering the last plank into place, "you take her here. No matter what happens outside." Zala nodded. "And you?" "I'll be fine," he replied with a confidence she wasn't sure she believed. That night, the storm returned, not in the skies, but in the form of Syndicate forces. Zala was woken by the faint hum of engines in the distance. She bolted upright, her senses screaming. "Remy," she hissed, shaking him awake. The two of them rushed to the window. In the distance, a sleek black ship hovered just above the treetops, its searchlights sweeping the area. "They found us," Zala whispered. "Then let's make them regret it," Remy said grimly, grabbing his rifle. The Syndicate troops descended in force, their boots hitting the muddy ground with precision. They spread out quickly, their movements coordinated. But Zala and Remy had prepared for this moment. The first explosion rocked the field as one of Remy's traps triggered, sending two of the troops flying. The others scattered, barking orders in a language Zala understood all too well. "Stay close," Remy told her as they moved through the shadows of the barn. Zala nodded, gripping her weapon tightly. No mercy. The battle was brutal and swift. Zala fought like a force of nature, her speed and precision overwhelming the Syndicate troops. Remy's sharpshooting kept their enemies off balance, his bullets finding their marks with unerring accuracy. One by one, the attackers fell, their cries drowned out by the storm raging overhead. By the time the last soldier dropped, Zala and Remy stood panting in the rain-soaked field, their clothes spattered with mud and blood. "It's over," Remy said, his voice rough. Zala looked around, her body trembling with exhaustion. For now. The next morning, the sun rose on a quiet battlefield. The Syndicate ship was gone, its surviving troops retreating to report their failure. For the first time in days, the farm was peaceful. Zala sat on the porch, cradling a cup of tea. Lena played in the yard, her laughter filling the air as she chased a butterfly. Remy joined Zala, sitting beside her with a tired but content expression. "They'll keep coming," Zala said, breaking the silence. Remy nodded. "Let them." She turned to him, her gaze soft. "You're a fool?" He smiled. "Maybe, but I'd rather be a fool with something to fight for." Zala's lips curved into a small smile, the first genuine one Remy had seen. She looked out at Lena, her heart swelling with a mixture of fear and hope. "Thank you," she said softly. Remy shook his head. "We're in this together, Zala. Family fights together." The word hung in the air, family. It was a concept Zala had long since given up on, a dream crushed by betrayal and loss. But here, in this unlikely place, with this unlikely man, she felt its fragile beginnings take root. As the sun climbed higher, warming the land, Zala leaned back and let herself believe, for the first time in years, that they had a chance.